Hello, AP Bio folks. Today we are doing a case study to look at one example of a cell signaling pathway and really dig into some of those super complicated diagrams to figure out how to interpret those and what those mean. So we're going to start out here just kind of setting the tone. First of all, just so you know, I did not write this case study. It was put together by this woman from the Natural Science Department in Madison. And it's not a case study that I would necessarily use with general bio, but I think you are mature enough to handle it and to look at it from a scientific perspective. We're going to start out with a little text conversation between two people. This woman named Melody is a doctor, and her friend Tessa is contacting her with some questions. So I'm just going to let you kind of read through this. It just sets the stage for kind of what we're talking about today. So Melody sent an email to her friend Tessa with some information about this cell signaling pathway, and it looks like this. Like I said, these are big and complicated. That is okay. Remember, when you look at these diagrams, the important thing is not to understand every single word, but to think about the overall picture and the signal, the reception, the transduction cascade in the middle, and the final response. So if you look at this one, first of all, notice that it tells you over here what some of these abbreviations stand for. NO, there's not actually, I don't know why this colon is right here in the middle. NO stands for nitric oxide. GTP is a molecule called guanosine triphosphate, and it gives you the name of some others. You'll notice one of these, this PKG, is one of those protein kinases that we talked about yesterday. If you look back in your notes, those are frequently parts of the cell signaling pathways. A couple other things that I want to point out in this diagram, the boxes you see here actually represent two different cells. So this tall rectangle on the left says it's an endothelial or a neuronal cell. If you look at the first part of that word, it looks like neurons. So this is like a cell from the nervous system that's sending out some signals. Endothelial is like in your skin. So this is like a nerve cell in the skin. This larger box represents a smooth muscle cell. So the box itself, you can think of kind of like the cell membrane. All of this is happening in the muscle cell. The rectangle over here is the cell membrane of this cell. All of these things are happening inside of this cell. So you're going to study this diagram in a little bit and go through and answer some questions looking at this pathway. And so this email was sent to Tessa, and she kind of looked at that for a while, and then they continued their conversation a little bit. A lot of biology, I'm just going to pause right here for a second. A lot of biology problems, a lot of diseases and different conditions and things actually have to do with things that are interfering with cell signaling pathways. So in addition to just understanding how this pathway works, we're also going to look at what happens when that pathway is broken and kind of how some different drugs and treatments can affect it. So the other thing that you will be looking at here, so here's the second email that Melody sent to Tessa. And when you look at this one, you're going to be looking not only at the basic pathway, this actually shows the same cell signaling pathway as the first diagram. This just has a little more detail. And when you look at this one, you're going to be trying to figure out the effects of those two different treatments she talked about. You're going to be looking at the chemical effect of Viagra and ginseng and where in these pathways those work. What I'd like you to do now is to access this document in Classroom. If you're watching this Ed Puzzle, you will probably be attempting this on your own, so do your best at this. Make a copy of that document in the homework section of Classroom, and then go through and answer the questions as best you can. Spend a good, maybe 10 minutes at least working on this right now. As this video pauses, go and work on it for a while, and then come back in the next section of the video. I'll review a little bit of kind of how this pathway works and give you some hints. So if you get stuck, come back here, but struggle with it for a little bit, give it a good shot, then come back and continue the last few minutes of this video. So when you looked at the first email here, it gave you this kind of slightly simpler diagram that we kind of looked at before. And so remember, you don't need to know every single word, but you should be able to kind of trace the arrows backwards to find where the signaling starts and forwards to kind of find the end result. So when you look at this, the molecule that actually enters this muscle cell and triggers this whole pathway to start is the nitric oxide. That's the ligand or the signaling molecule that enters this muscle cell and starts this pathway. So you can see it goes in across the cell membrane here and interacts with this protein called guanylyl cyclase. That's the receptor protein that bonds with that nitric oxide. So you can see the active form of that has the nitric oxide bonded to the guanylyl cyclase. That triggers this whole cascade of events. And within this signal transduction pathway, the whole middle part, there are a couple of molecules that are likely second messengers. And if you didn't get both of these, that's okay. But the second messengers are probably the cyclic GMP. Anytime you see those cyclic molecules with that little C in front, that's probably a second messenger because those molecules tend to be released through these pathways and then just kind of recycled by the cell. Also, calcium is a very, very common second messenger in these pathways. So anytime you see that, that's usually a second messenger. The end response of this, of course, is the muscle relaxation at the end. So that's the final response. So that's just kind of an overview of how this pathway works. And that should help you to answer most of the questions in the first section of this assignment. The second part had you look at the second diagram and asked you to look a little bit more closely at the effects of ginseng and Viagra. It tells you in there or in the questions that ginseng affects the production of nitric oxide. And so as you think about ginseng, remember the point of using these is to fix the erectile dysfunction. Hang on, I cannot write and talk at the same time. So ginseng affects this part of the pathway. And so what the question asks you to figure out is what effect do you think ginseng has on that nitric oxide that would help enhance this chemical pathway? If you follow this through, this is the same pathway as before. The nitric oxide binds with that guanylyl cyclase. That then activates several other things. Here's that cyclic GMP, that second messenger. Your calcium is over kind of in this side portion, and it leads to this final response of relaxation. So even though there's a lot more detail in here, you can still trace that same main pathway. So ginseng affects the nitric oxide directly. The other one that it asks you to look at is Viagra, which works on this molecule called PDE5. So we're going to look at that one for a minute. This is what is affected by Viagra. Hang on a second while I write. And so I just want to explain what PDE5 does so you kind of understand this part of the diagram. You'll see in this diagram, cyclic GMP kind of carries the message from the guanylyl cyclase. It activates this protein PKG, which then leads to that final response. So that's kind of the main pathway through here. Cyclic GMP, though, also has this arrow going off to the left that points to PDE5. What that means is that PDE5 actually breaks down cyclic GMP. Because like any signal transduction pathway, you don't want this response to continue forever. Eventually, you want to be able to turn this pathway off. And so PDE5 breaks down the second messenger. And so if this disappears, then this will no longer be activated and this will stop. So it kind of turns off that whole pathway. That's the role of PDE5. So what you're trying to figure out here is, how does Viagra affect this molecule in order to enhance and continue the cell signaling pathway? So those aren't the answers, but hopefully those are a couple of clues to get you a little bit closer as you answer the last few questions in here. So now go back into your assignment and finish up the questions as best you can. The very last question, you need to just take your best educated guess based on your understanding of that diagram and of that pathway. As long as it is a logical guess, you will get credit for that last question. There's not one specific molecule that I'm looking for there. When you finish, please make sure to attach your finished document to that classroom post and turn this case study in. Your presentations are due tomorrow. If you have any questions about that research, please make sure you let me know today, because we will be beginning presentations during our live sessions tomorrow. So I hope you have a great afternoon, and I will talk to you later.